Chapter 8. A busy school festival. Adolf Ferren, now in his third year of the intermediate course, seethed with rage and dissatisfaction. Today, Minerva's would put on its school festival, and the best of the best would be presenting their research findings. And one of those presentations would be led by that awful Louis Miller. Intermediate course students rarely ever presented. And festival presentations drew not only those from Minerva's, but also mags from all over the kingdom of Rydil, including from the prestigious Mags Guild. An unworthy presentation would mar the school's very name. That meant the teachers trusted Louis to be successful. Why him? Why not me? I'm a Ferren. And he's just some nobody from the countryside. Just remembering his impertinent face made Adolph's guts boil. At first, Louis Miller had just been some kid Adolph didn't particularly like. He was a country bumpkin who thought he was hot stuff, so Adolph had wanted to put him in his place. But then he'd thrown Terence into a cesspit. And when Adolph razzed him only a little, of course, the upstart had punched him in the nose so hard, he'd bled. The kid was running wild, acting however he pleased. For some reason, though, the teachers liked him. They treated him differently. Sure, he gets decent grades. But his behavior is awful. I behave properly all the time, so my good grades should count more than his. I could give a much better presentation than he could, too. That prickling irritation had piled up until it became a deep-rooted loathing. Adolph hoped Louis would screw up his presentation and thoroughly embarrass himself. And yet he had a feeling that wouldn't happen. Not only was Louis well practiced with magecraft, he was near the top of their grade on the written exams, too. Whenever the teachers used well-written reports as examples, Louis's name always came up. There has to be a way to humiliate him somehow, right? A little under an hour remained until the beginning of the festival. The people from town were already setting up their booths and stalls. Just then, Adolph stopped. He'd spotted a familiar head of chestnut hair. "Hey, Sally. What is this?" rumbled Louis. "Isn't it cute? Now you and I match." As Sally went about setting up the stall, she lifted the hem of her skirt. It was long, cute, and wide. Sally's was blue, and the one she'd given Louis was red, a color variation on the same design, apparently. Since it was bad for Minerva's reputation if its students were seen working at a stall like this, Louis needed to dress in a way that wouldn't stand out. And this was the outfit Sally had chosen for him, a blouse with a ribbon at the collar, plus a long skirt and a neat, plain apron. She hadn't stopped there, though. The outfit came with a lengthy wig that closely matched his hair color. "I borrowed the wig from a friend who does theater," Sally explained. "Take good care of it, all right? I'd rather throw it directly in the trash. You break it, you buy it. And it's going to be quite expensive." It was true that Louis had a feminine face. He'd always been self-conscious about it, ever since his time working at the brothel. The owner had used it to threaten him, and he was constantly being underestimated because of his looks. Nothing good had ever come of them. Anger was radiating from Louis's body, and his expression would make most people shake in their boots. Sally, however, simply cackled and paid him no mind. She was used to her stern-faced father and had built up a resistance to such looks. "Papa said you'd be paid handsomely for this," she told him, before lowering her voice and stating the amount. Louis clutched his breast, looking anguished. It was a very handsome sum. With that much, he'd be able to do more than buy new boots and underwear. He could get a new bag to replace the one with a hole, and a new feather pen, too, since his was almost broken. He could even buy a big jar of his favorite jam. He considered zooming back to his dorm room and changing into his regular clothes. Owen's parents would be visiting today, though, and Louis had already told him he wouldn't be back until the festival was over. "No slacking, now," said Sally. "Hurry up and get ready. There are some bushies over there. Be quick about it." "I don't know if you realize this," said Louis, "but you're basically shoving a knife into an old wound of mine and laughing about it." "Wow. Isn't that how you act all the time, though?" Unable to respond, Louis took the clothes and wig and moved behind some bushes. Having put on the beribboned blouse and apron over his long skirt, Louis scowled. He could feel a draft between his legs. Sally helped him with the wig, parting the long chestnut-colored hair down the middle, tying it, and then topping it with a kerchief. With that, the look was complete. He was a normal town girl, plain but cute. His chestnut hair swayed to and fro, and long eyelashes framed his grayish-purple eyes. His clothes, homely yet charming, brought out his lovely facial features, but his hands were conspicuously red and calloused from punching. He ground his teeth in rage and stomped around, just like an angry earth dragon. Okay, now you have to smile. Smile. What's the point of wearing a cute outfit if you're going to look at everyone like some kind of ferocious dragon? I'm not capable of smiling and pretending to be friendly while dressed like this. Then learn from me. I always have a smile on. As Louis was trying to come up with a good retort, the bell rang, marking the start of the school festival. He clicked his tongue, then put his back to the main thoroughfare and confronted the pot of soup. I'm not talking to anyone, okay? I watch the fire, make the soup, and wash the dishes. That's it. All right. Louis's research presentation would come relatively late that day. It was the fourth one in the afternoon. He'd promised to help Sally at the stall until then. His preparations were in perfect order. Under Mega's instruction, he'd asked the kind-hearted Carla to help him gather materials, brawling with Rutherford now and then whenever the man butted in. And somehow, he'd managed to pull it all together within 3 weeks. He was interested in 1 or 2 of the other presentations, but he'd asked Rosalie and Owen to collect the distributed materials for him. The biggest surprise, though, had been that Woodman, the school's resident doctor, would be giving a presentation, too. While magecraft that affected the human body was totally forbidden in the Kingdom of Radill, there were ways to use magical items to treat several mana-related symptoms and syndromes without leaving any after-effects. Woodman would be presenting on the methodology of such techniques. I wish I could go around the festival with Rosalie. Louis squatted in front of the stove and checked the heat level. There was a slight breeze that day, so he needed to pay careful attention to the fire. Even after the festival began, it took a little while for guests to arrive. As noon drew near, however, things really picked up. The soup sold well, likely because of the strong winds and chilly air. Their customers were a 50-50 split of students and guests, but nobody seemed to have recognized Louis yet. Sally, with her curly hair and bright, clear eyes, was considered a beauty in town. She was friendly, too, and was managing to monopolize the customers' attention. She would take the orders and the money, Louis would dish out the soup, and Sally would hand it to the customers. Stalls like these had somewhat higher prices compared to their parent establishment. The convention was to pay a little extra to cover the cost of your dish and utensils, then collect the deposit when you returned them. It was Louis's job to take those dishes and utensils and wash them. He had gone to rinse some in a basin a short distance away, and just as he snuck back, Sally leaned over and said, I need to go to the restroom. Will you mind the stall while I'm gone? Sure. If we get any kids from Minerva's, I'll just tell them we're getting things set up and shoo them away. It would be embarrassing for anyone to see him in this outfit, but his greatest fear was that Rosalie would spot him. Rutherford, too, if the old rat caught a glimpse of him, he'd have to pummel the man's withering body right into his coffin. Louis stirred the soup. Please no customers. Please no customers, he repeated to himself. His hopes were dashed, however, when a voice came from behind him. Hello. Could we get 2 bowls of soup? Louis looked up slightly and glanced at the customer. There were 2 of them, both boys about his age, but they weren't wearing Minerva's uniforms. The speaker had blonde hair and a stern face. He was muscular all over and wore well-tailored clothing. Louis recalled a large animal he'd seen at the circus in town a while back. What was that thing called? Oh, that's right. A gorilla. He looked at the blonde-haired boy again. Yes, his excellent build and round eyes were more than fitting for a golden gorilla. Standing behind him and to the side was a black-haired boy of average build and plain features. He wore loose clothes and had a sword on his belt. Louis assumed they were some noble kid and his bodyguard, not an unusual pairing around here. Many of the students at Minerva's were the children of nobility, and Louis suspected this boy was the same. But since they weren't from the school, he figured it was all right to serve them. Without a word, Louis took their money and gave them some soup. The blonde-haired boy reached out and took the bowl and spoon from Louis. When he did, the black-haired boy stopped him. "Let me taste it for poison first," he said quietly. Poison. The word instantly filled Louis with irritation. He snatched back the bowl of soup, then put a spoonful of it in his mouth so they could both see. Goa had done a good job preparing it, and Lo had added delicate seasoning. It was good soup. Louis held the bowl out again and glared at the boys. "See? You satisfied now?" The blonde one looked taken aback and quickly bowed. "I'm sorry," he shouted. "I apologize for my servant's rudeness." Louis scowled. Why was he yelling? "Let me start over," the boy continued, his tone polite and formal. "May I have this soup?" "Sure thing. Here you go." The boy's stern features softened at Louis's rough demeanor. "Thank you," he said. The two customers, bowls in hand, started sipping their soup next to the stall, conversing in between sips. "Nate, I know it's important to test my food. But you can't bring it up in front of the server." "I'm terribly sorry, sir. This soup is exquisite. Why, it's perfect for warming up our cold bodies, isn't it?" "It is, sir." Though the blonde-haired boy made sure to remonstrate his servant, he didn't drag out his criticism and quickly went back to complimenting the soup at every opportunity. Eventually, once their bowls were empty, the blonde-haired boy began to fidget. "Nate, what do we do with our bowls? Do we take them with us?" "No, we return them, sir. Allow me." Nate, the black-haired boy, put one bowl inside the other, then returned to the stall. "I apologize for my previous rudeness." His voice was like a whisper on the wind. At first, Louis had thought the boy simply had a quiet voice, but he could hear a whooshing of air every time he spoke. He must have had a bad throat. Without a word, Louis took the bowls, then shot the boy a cold glare to get him to leave at once. Nate met his dangerous gaze and continued, his voice faint. "By the way, are you wearing that outfit because you like it? Get lost unless you want me to rip out your eyeballs." Nate said nothing more. He bowed to Louis, then said "Let's be off, sir" to his master. The other boy's stern features broke into a jovial smile. "Thank you for the meal," he shouted at Louis. "That soup was incredible." "Thanks. I'll tell the guy who made it." "Just stop yelling. You're gonna draw attention," thought Louis wearily as he watched the two of them go. A naive kid who thinks his incognito and his servant, probably. Once they were gone, Louis turned back to the simple stove. The flame had grown weak for a little while, and he'd been slightly concerned. Too strong, and you'd boil the soup; too weak, and it wouldn't stay warm. He squatted, legs spread under his skirt, and adjusted the flame's strength. That was when he noticed something. He'd piled his things in one corner of the stall, but when he glanced over now, his uniform was gone. It had been at the top of the pile, and he'd placed a large rock on top of it to make sure it didn't blow away in the wind. The stone was still there, though, only the uniform was gone. Louis had been working almost exclusively in the back all day, and he'd kept one eye on his things the whole time. His uniform had been there right up until Sally went to use the restroom. If someone had taken it and snuck away, they would have had only one chance while Louis was selling soup to the two boys. In other words, not much time had passed since his uniform was stolen. "Thanks for minding the place, Louis." Just then, Sally returned. Louis pushed the box containing the day's proceeds into her hands. "Sorry, but we got a swap," he said. "Someone stole my uniform. I have to find the criminal and strangle them." "Huh? No way. That's awful. For the criminal, anyway." That last part perfectly encapsulated how Sally thought of Louis. "Do you know who it is?" "He didn't touch the valuables, aside from my uniform." "That means this is just a prank." And for the most part, there's only one person at Minerva's who'd stoop to something this petty. Louis grinned wickedly, baring his canines, and cracked his knuckles. Bursting out of the stall, Louis first checked the nearby bushes. In truth, it would have been quicker to seize some random student and demand to know where Adolf Ferren was, but then he'd be exposing himself in girls' clothes. He needed to avoid that at any cost. The grass around here has been crushed, he noted. He was hiding, waiting for a chance to steal my uniform. Judging by the footprints, he headed toward the school building. Like a veteran hunter stalking his prey, Louis followed the subtle traces, not missing a single one. Naturally, he did so while choosing lesser-traveled paths, occasionally jumping from behind one tree to another, clinging to walls or hiding in narrow confines, all to escape the eyes of the other students. I have less than an hour until my research presentation, he thought. Not much time. In a corner of his mind, he started to mull over which would be less embarrassing if worse came to worst, presenting in his underwear or doing so in girls' clothes. The former would be less emotionally draining. But it was still cold this time of year, and if he wanted to stay warm, the latter would serve him better. Neither choice was ideal. Either that, or he could threaten some random male student and strip him. Now he was thinking like a regular highway robber. As he walked next to the school building, he spotted the one he was after right beside the hallway leading to the lecture hall. A tall, pretentious boy with black hair, Adolf Ferren. He was talking to someone, laughing indiscreetly. It was a brown-haired girl. Wait, that's Rosalie. In that moment, Louis felt so angry, the blood vessels in his head seemed about to explode. That little bastard. He knows I can't show myself in front of Rosalie dressed like this. Apparently, Adolf was inviting her to go with him to the lecture hall. He put an arm around her shoulders in an overly familiar way, bringing their faces close. I'm going to crush that huge forehead of his. Louis picked up a rock near his feet and got ready to throw it. But then a bold voice interrupted him. It was far away, but he had no problem hearing it. Excuse me, but could I ask the way? A blonde-haired boy with stern features was speaking to Adolf and Rosalie, the same boy who had just bought soup from him. His black-haired servant was waiting behind him, sword still on his hip. Louis couldn't make out Rosalie's expression from where he was, but Adolf was visibly rattled. Rosalie and the blonde-haired boy exchanged a few short words, and then she started walking with him toward the school building, showing him the way. Adolf tried to tag along, but at a word from Rosalie, he withdrew. Louis guessed she'd said something like, "Don't worry about me and go to the lecture hall. You wanted to listen to that presentation, right?" He felt sure that was how she would put it. Louis silently cheered on the other boy. Nice work, gorilla. Great job. In truth, he was a little jealous, but this was still 100 times better than Adolf putting his arm around Rosalie's shoulders as Louis stood and watched in his skirt. Adolf stood there awkwardly for a moment, but he soon hastened toward the lecture hall. He probably thought that Louis wouldn't follow him inside. Louis lowered his posture so no one would see his face and sprinted like a bear chasing its prey. Then, a short distance away from the lecture hall, he rammed into Adolf. He didn't use any magecraft, the idea never even occurred to him. If he wanted to punish this kid, it would be easier and faster to do it the old-fashioned way. Adolf let out a muffled grunt as Louis tackled him. He looked up, and sweat broke out over his face. Louis threw the other boy over his shoulder, then moved behind some trees to get out of the way. A few people had caught sight of the incident, but he doubted any had seen his face, at least. He tossed Adolf to the ground and stepped on the boy's stomach. And then, dressed in his pretty girl's clothes and baring his teeth like a wicked dragon, he smiled. "Where'd you put my uniform?" "Ugh. Grah. I don't know what you're talking about. Tell me the truth and I'll have mercy. A little, anyway." Louis twisted his heel, causing Adolf's breathing to grow pained and ragged. But even then, he flashed Louis a derisive grin and put on a strong front. "Ha! Like I'd ever trust anything you said, girl face." For a moment, just a moment, Louis felt all the sound in the world disappear. His anger had crossed a line, and for a split second, his emotions calmed. But soon, he felt pure murder swell within him. His effeminate face remained impassive, but his purple eyes, tinged with grey, glinted like the edge of a razor. "Say that again, and I'll crush your balls." Feeling bloodlust wash over him like a cold blade held to his neck, Adolf sputtered and wailed. I burned. I burned them. Stupid. Moron. It's over for you now. Go humiliate yourself at the pre-sen. You're the one who's gonna be humiliated. Louis straddled Adolf and reached for the buttons on his uniform. The research presentations were held in the big lecture hall, and apart from the faculty seating was a section for special guests. Most of the ones sitting there were famous mags, high-ranking members of the Mags Guild or the Royal Magic Research Institute. In one of those guest seats sat a beautiful woman. She'd put a fluffy cushion underneath her before sitting down. She had gorgeous silver hair, tied back, and it was hard to tell how old she was. Her dress featured a plunging neckline, and over it she wore a luxurious robe covered in gold thread embroidery. Next to her was a boy, probably about 6 or 7, sitting up straight and proper. He had green eyes and curly red hair that was as lustrous as a crimson rose. He was beautiful, almost like a doll, and he wore a frilled dress shirt, a jacket with rose-shaped buttons on it, and a pair of shorts. He looked for all the world like the son of a good, prestigious family. While the presentation was going on, the boy kept his back straight and proper, but once it was over and there was a short break, he leaned back against his seat and yawned. The silver-haired woman spoke to him, her voice smooth and relaxed. "Has it gotten a little boring for you?" "And not at all, Miss Mary. I was listening, yeah, I promise. That woodman guy was talking about using magical items for healing. My family is good at imbuement magic, so it's really relevant for us and..." "Amham. I'm happy you were listening. There's a good boy." The woman named Mary smiled and hugged the boy closer to her, his crimson locks falling against her cheek. "Once we're done listening to the presentations, why don't we go outside?" she suggested. "There's a girl named the Starspear Witch at the training grounds. She's going to reveal an incredible spell. A very pretty one. Wow, I want to go. I can't wait." The boy's fair cheeks flushed a rosy red, and his eyes seemed to sparkle. Because of his beautiful face, he seemed hard to approach at first. But when he smiled, he looked his age, and the effect was quite charming. "I just wish Melissa could have come with us," said Mary. "My sister told me not to go to the school festival. She says it will just make me jealous." At that, he looked down and swung his feet. Saying it out loud must have brought on a wave of jealousy. Eventually, though, he went on. "I thought I'd be able to make lots of friends if I went to school. But when I told my grandma that, she said I didn't need school." The boy hung his head in disappointment. Then Mary smiled mischievously and whispered into his ear. "Hey, Raoul, why don't we slip away for a moment and go to the stalls?" "Are you sure? Grandma said I shouldn't." Mary took off her robe and put on a fur coat, then winked at the boy. "Then we'll just have to keep it a secret, won't we?" Hooray! Yet another afternoon presentation had come to an end. Maga, who had been listening to it from the faculty seating, exhaled and looked up at the clock on the wall. After a brief intermission, it would be Louis Miller's turn to present. She'd taught him everything she could, but she was still uneasy. As the break came to an end, she saw the people who had left their seats begin to trickle back in. Even so, there were a lot fewer people in the audience. But that was to be expected. A presentation from an intermediate course student was probably a low priority for most people. "You look worried, Maga." Rutherford was sitting next to her, and he'd just gotten back to his seat. His tone was considerate. Maga grimaced. "I suppose I am. Several of the sages appear to be in attendance, after all." She looked at the special guest area. So far, she'd noticed 3 of them. 2 were in their seats at the moment, the Thunderclap Mage and the Aquamancy Mage. The Starseer which had left the lecture hall with the Roseburg child, there was no sign of them coming back. Maga turned toward the podium. But I've done everything I can. And what a job it was. My last big accomplishment as a teacher. Maga would be retiring that year. She was feeling her age and had been thinking about it for quite some time. The death of her master, the water mirror mage, had convinced her. The man was regarded as the preeminent expert in barrier techniques, but despite being his apprentice, Maga hadn't accomplished very much. She'd always felt guilty about that. Perhaps that guilt had made her want to keep up her work as a mage at the forefront of her field, at least for as long as her master was alive. She would be retiring without leaving any legacy to speak of, but she'd made her peace with that. "Mr. Rutherford," she said. "Yeah. I hereby recommend Louis Miller as a candidate to join the laboratory of Gideon Rutherford, the Mage of Violet Smoke." Talented students, once in the advanced course, had the chance to become part of a research lab. That said, Rutherford was famous for almost never taking on any students. Right now, he only had one, Carla Maxwell, the Starspear Witch. Maga had always wanted to recommend Louis to him. She thought he was the best fit. "I'm no barrier expert, you know," he replied. While Louis Miller is very skilled with barriers, he has many other talents. I think it would be best for him to build a broad, thorough base of knowledge. Well, I guess he is a quick learner. And clever. Many mags specialized in one specific field of study. Louis was a rare case, someone who could learn and master all systems and elements of magecraft. Louis pretended to be modest, saying his knowledge was merely superficial. But he never stopped there. He had the grit and determination to use what he learned, and to solidify his skills with trial and error. Rutherford looked conflicted. The fingers on his right hand moved, as if he were twirling his pipe, even though his hand was empty. He wasn't allowed to smoke inside the lecture hall, and he probably didn't know what else to do with his hands. "I know I recommended him as a scholarship student," he said, "but that doesn't mean I can take him on as a research student, too. Think of the extra work." "I'd like you to decide after seeing his presentation," said Maga. Eventually, the short break ended, and the presentations resumed. Louis moved up to the podium, papers in hand. For some reason, his uniform looked baggy, and he had the cuffs rolled up on both his shirt sleeves and pant legs. "I can't believe it. Can't he dress properly for his own presentation?" thought Maga, privately fuming as the handouts made their way through the audience. Rutherford got them first, and when he saw them, he snorted. What could he be laughing about? Wondered Maga. I half expected him to get angry or exasperated, but to laugh. She had checked over the contents of the handout, but she hadn't seen the cover page. What in the world had that problem child written on the cover? With much consternation, she looked and her eyes widened. The cover page listed the research theme and the name of the presenter. But even bigger and more conspicuous than the presenter's name were the words direction and supervision, Clarice Maga, teacher of barrier techniques. Rosalie Verde sat near the back of the hall as she listened to Louis's research presentation. There were empty seats toward the front, but she didn't have the courage to sit up there, so close to the special guest seating. Louis wasn't hiding his accent, and his attitude was just as brash as ever. But anyone who knew him could tell from the way he spoke that he was being extremely cautious about what he said. As you can see, the magic battle barrier shows an inherent weakness in the formula connection, starting with clause 90. I have two proposals that could remedy this when incorporated. The first is Astley's mana circulation formula, and the second is. Louis would never say shows an inherent weakness. He'd say this barrier is full of holes or this thing leaks like a sieve. The presentation itself showed an incredible degree of talent. Those who had assumed an intermediate course student couldn't have much of interest to say now leaned forward in their seats, listening closely. Magic battle barriers were extremely complex and difficult to use. They had to be calculated very carefully to accommodate imbuing a single barrier with multiple effects without causing it to collapse in the process. It was like balancing a plate on your finger, then piling food on top. If the food wasn't stacked just right, the whole thing would topple over. Others had pointed out weaknesses and offered suggestions for improvement, but Louis took that a step further, proposing ways to incorporate new formulae into the barrier. In other words, he would stabilize the precarious plate on his finger, then put even more food on top. Once the presentation was over, the question and answer session began. Several important members of the Mags Guild and researchers from the Royal Magic Research Institute raised their hands. Louis, despite his obvious annoyance at having to answer, responded matter-of-factly. His face betrayed his thoughts. He wanted to tell the guests to shut up and use their heads, that a little research would answer all their questions for them. But he was being very docile today, maybe because his enrollment in the advanced course depended on this. Once he'd answered all the questions, Louis's presentation ended with a booming round of applause. Rosalie joined in, putting her heart into it. Then she glanced over at the special guest seating. There he was, remaining patiently in his seat, even after the presentation was over. If I don't go now, I won't get a better chance. He would never speak to her first. She had to be the initiator. Clenching her fists, her fingers had grown cold. Rosalie stood up and approached the guest seating. Sitting at the very edge was a man in his mid-40s with dark brown hair combed back. This was one of the 7 sages, the Aquamancy Mage, Bertrand Verde. Rosalie's father. It's good to see you again, father. Yeah. The conversation dropped off immediately. Her father was a busy man. When Rosalie went home for long breaks, he was frequently absent. She didn't want to take up his time with small talk. Chatting about her life at school seemed especially pointless. After all, Rosalie would never accomplish anything that would make a sage like her father proud. But there's one thing I still need to tell him. She swallowed, then began moving her lips. Father, I want to continue into the advanced course. Her father gave her a hard look, then a subtle nod. Do as you wish. Thank you. Rosalie bowed deeply and excused herself, leaving the guest seating behind. The blood finally started to circulate in her cold fingers again. He hadn't stopped her, that was all it was, but it made Rosalie happy. As Rosalie left the guest seating area, the short old man seated next to Bertrand spoke up, his voice soft and frail. Are you on bad terms with your daughter, Verde? He asked. I doubt she thinks of me as her father. Oh. The old man stroked his long beard, looking closely at Bertrand, waiting for him to continue. After several seconds of hesitation, Bertrand did just that. Her mana capacity is rather low. And yet, I may have pushed my own ideals onto her. Been too strict with her. I see. And she must find me distasteful. Ham. The oldest of the 7 sages, Graham Sanders, the thunderclap mage, tilted his head first to one side, then to the other. Communication is very important, you know. Finished with his research presentation, Louis went straight back to the stall. The soup had evidently sold out, and Sally was working on packing up the place. Oh, Louis, welcome back, she said. Listen to this. A little while ago, a super pretty lady and an incredibly cute boy came by. Yeah, sure. And he was just so cute, I gave him an extra big helping, even though I knew I shouldn't have. I thought you weren't into younger guys. That's a completely different matter. By the way, what happened to the clothes I lent you? Without a word, Louis shoved the girl's outfit and wig into her arms. I'm not doing this again, got it? He growled. He tried threatening her with a ferocious expression, but Sally merely cackled at him. Louis sniffed and got to work packing up. First, he did a quick tally of their sales, then he rushed through washing the rest of the dirty dishes. As they were loading everything onto a cart, Sally turned to him. You're in a hurry, huh? There's something I wanna check out. They were sharing the cart with the next stall over, and the man in charge of it had promised to bring their things back to town for them. Once they got it all loaded up, Louis's job would be complete. With a grunt, he put the simple stove, now disassembled, up on the cart, then raised a hand to Sally. All right, I'm going. Sounds good. Thanks for your hard work. After Sally saw him off, Louis hurried toward the magic battle training grounds. People were already packed into the surrounding area. Everyone at the festival had shown up, and they were all pressing in at once. Just then, Louis saw a giant magic circle expand on the other side of the crowd. A huge spear of light appeared at its center, as thick as a log. Maintaining the spear of shining white light was a female student with her brick-colored hair tied back, the great genius of Minerva's, Carla Maxwell, the Star Spear Witch. That spear, made of high-density light, was the origin of her title, the Star Spear. It was a light spell, an element almost no one in the kingdom could use. The Star Spear's power was said to rival that of the six-fold strengthened magecraft of Bradford Firestone, the artillery mage, a sage said to possess the greatest firepower in the kingdom. There was no doubt it was one of the most powerful spells in all of R'dil. Louis watched Carla from afar. Despite her maintaining such complex and powerful magecraft, her face still looked as relaxed as that of a cat dozing in the sunlight. "Star Spear, pierce," she said, her voice light and carefree. At her command, the glittering spear shot up into the heavens. It pierced the thick cloud layer, and in the bright red evening sky, it scattered star-like particles behind it. Whoa, thought Louis. The 6 main elements of magecraft used in the kingdom of R'dil were fire, water, wind, earth, lightning, and ice. Light and dark magecraft existed in theory, but little was known about them. At most, 1 or 2 prominent mage families held tidbits of that knowledge. They kept them secret, though, passing them down through the generations. And Carla Maxwell, the Star Spear Witch, had independently developed such a spell and cast it, all on her own. Carla hadn't come from any prominent mage family. In fact, she wasn't even a noble. The fact that such a girl had developed a light spell, in her teens, no less, had sent waves through the magecraft world. She was the young mage everyone had their eyes on. They had no doubt she would join the 7 sages eventually. If I'd seen that back when I first came to Minerva's, thought Louis, I don't think I would have realized what was so amazing about it. Back then, he probably would have thought it was just a flashy spell that sparkled. But the more he studied, the more the awesome talents of those around him became apparent. As did the fact that he couldn't begin to compare. Louis wasn't one to let that crush his spirit, though. "There you are, Louis Miller." Suddenly, a voice called out to him from the side. It was Majo, his teacher. "Did you see that, Ms. Majo?" he asked. "The Star Spear? That was wild. I could lay a barrier upon barrier, and I doubt they'd protect me from that. I don't even think I could compete in mana density. If I was going to block it, I'd need a different approach, like dismantling the formula as it made contact with the barrier, or... I've recommended you to Professor Rutherford's laboratory." The abruptness of her comment made him freeze for a few seconds. He managed. He knew about the laboratory system in the advanced course. But if Louis was going to join one, he wanted it to be Majo's. "I'd rather apply to join your lab, Ms. Majo. Actually, I'll be retiring this year." "What?" Louis's jaw dropped. "You never told me that." "Well, I'm getting on in years. I don't have the energy left to keep on scolding problem children." Louis knew Majo was wearing out her throat yelling at him on a daily basis, so he shut his mouth. It was an unusually prudent gesture, at which Majo returned a gentle smile. "Your presentation today was marvelous. And I'm proud to have my name on your handouts. I doubt anyone will contest your wish to move on to the advanced course. Once you do, apprentice yourself to Mr. Rutherford. The Star Spear which belongs to his lab as well. You will learn much." Louis fell into a sulky silence. He didn't know what to say at times like these. He hesitated for a few moments, but in the end, he decided to be bold and act like the problem child he was. "I'm gonna become a pretty spectacular mage one day, you know." "I'm sure you will. You have what it takes. And once I'm a high mage, I've got it, I'll call myself the Barrier Mage. Then you can tell all the kids on your block about me. About how you're the Barrier Witch, and you taught me all I know about barriers." Majo raised a hand to her mouth, then let out a breathy laugh. You talk a big game, Louis Miller. You'll need to change your ways and study even more diligently. Naturally, any destructive acts, violence against classmates, and petty theft, is out of the question. She trailed off as Louis, wearing that baggy uniform, averted his eyes. As she realized something, Mega's brows lifted, and she peered into his face. Louis Miller, look at me. That uniform. Don't tell me. With the Star Spear demonstration over, the spectators were dispersing. Someone came running toward them, weaving through the crowd. It was Rutherford. Hey, you brat. I heard about how you hung Adolphe Ferron from a tree half-naked and tortured him with smoke. Get to the faculty room. Now. Huh, said Louis, feigning innocence. I guess someone was trying to make smoked meat out of him. Rutherford's punch sent him flying as Mega cast her eyes to the sky in resignation.